It was less Narnia and more Narni. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are seeing my face for the first time, hello, my name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. And this is my Stagey YouTube channel, which I use to review the shows that I've been invited to go and see here in the UK as an independent theatre critic, and I talk about news and drama and gossip and stagey goings-on happening worldwide. If that sounds like the kind of thing that you would be interested in, make sure that you have subscribed so you don't miss any of my stagey content. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a show that I went to see this evening. It is the same day. I am on it. I was invited to the media night for The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which is currently playing at the Gillian Lynne Theatre here in the West End in London. Now, if you've heard me mention this theatre before, it's because this is where Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella was playing when it was in the West End. Now has been replaced by The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Now, I have not seen this production or any version of this play previously. I didn't catch it while it was at the Bridge Theatre. It subsequently went on tour before coming back to London. I'm given to understand that it has been adapted and changed a decent amount, and I will not have any kind of a perspective on that because this is my first time seeing it. The context that I have for knowledge of this show is the film adaptation that I vaguely remember, and watching the play tonight I was reminded of how much I love the film adaptation, and also having read the book like a bajillion years ago. So I was really excited to go and see this production tonight. From the little that I knew about it and from what I'd heard about it, I really thought this was going to be exactly my kind of theatre, with like puppetry and creative, innovative storytelling. That's all of the stuff that I really enjoy. So did it live up to my lofty expectations, or was I disappointed? You will find out in today's full review. Before I make a start on this one, let me remind you, you can click on the link down below to get an account with ShowScore. That's a website that collates all of my written reviews that I've done for other publications like Broadway World and What's on Stage, as well as my own blog, and it keeps them all in one handy place so that you can stay up to date with all the reviews that I've written, as well as all the ones you see on YouTube. If you make your own account on ShowScore using the link down below, you can also review these shows for yourself. So if you have been to see The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and you would like to share your thoughts on it, you can make an account with ShowScore and you can do just that. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you go and find me on other social media platforms. I'm at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, and I post all kinds of different content on each of those. Now let's talk about The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. So unusually, I want to talk about the direction of this production first. I want to give you a sense of the vibes of this staging of the show, because generally most people, I think, are familiar with the story or familiar with the film. If you know The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe at all, what this production does is it's a very, I sort of describe these things as rustic. I don't know if that really means anything, but that's the adjective I always want to spring towards. It's directed by Michael Fenterman, who directed Amelie, the musical in the West End, with many of the same cast members who are in this production. He also recently directed a one-person version of Jekyll and Hyde with former Amelie leading lady Audrey Brisson at Reading Rep, and I really enjoyed both of those productions. Again, made me think I was really going to enjoy this at the Gillian Lynne. And The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe has a very similar vibe to Amelie. We have this big ensemble cast playing multiple roles. There's a lot of creative storytelling. There's the use of puppetry. There's a lot of folk music throughout the show. There's actors playing instruments on stage and singing and self-accompanying. And it's this enormous fantasy epic, and rather than using, huge scenes and expensive set pieces to portray that kind of a story, we're using clever, innovative theatrical techniques. There's a little model train that is carried around. There are briefcases that turn into train carriages and light up. That's super cute. The way in which different members of the company play animals is very clever. There's some very clever costuming with just some of the elements that suggest that they are animals and how they move differently. There's a big puppet lion that moves not unlike Joey from Warhorse or the tiger from Life of Pi, if maybe perhaps a little less expressively. And Chris Jarrett represents the Aslan character, and he emotes and speaks on behalf of the lion puppet while standing next to it and still acting for all intents and purposes, which is a choice, but I'll get to that later. It's also visually not dissimilar from Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The stage is made up of these concentric circles of big lit rings, the smallest of which opens at the back occasionally, and every time they go through the wardrobe and they're transported to this other world, we are plunged into darkness and people run around the front of the stage and these wardrobe doors get spun around. That transition looks really, really cool, but it gives you a sense of how they tell this kind of a story. And a lot of that I really dug. I like to see creativity, I like to see innovation. I know I've mentioned that a couple of times already, but I really do. This should have been the kind of theatre that I enjoyed. However, I struggled with this production. I think there was just one too many things that disappointed me. There were areas where it fell short, and there were characterizations that I felt weren't interesting enough, and there were pacing problems. I'm going to use another section to really expand on all of these things, but essentially and controversially, I left the theatre feeling as though maybe this show was a little bit style over substance, and Michael Fenterman perhaps had been directing the show he wanted this to be. I think his stylistic approach worked much better for something like Amelie, and wasn't perhaps as well suited to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, or perhaps was just a half-baked version of that idea. Whatever it was didn't feel fully realised, and it didn't feel as though it was achieving what it ought to with this kind of a story, with what this story is capable of delivering. So I'm settling on a 3-star review for this production, which surprises even myself. Let me talk to you a little bit more about the particular shortcomings I thought of this production. So pacing is a big issue for me on this. The first act is exceedingly slow. Perhaps I'm misremembering the pacing of the film, and it does take them that long for all 4 of them to get to Narnia, but there's an awful lot of exposition that we have in order to get to a place that the audience all know about anyway. And I appreciate the source material being what it is. I'm not expecting them to rewrite it, but even once we get to Narnia, there's a lot of moments that are drawn out for a lot longer than they need to be. When we first meet the beavers, it feels like we are in the beaver dam for a really long time, and I'm thinking there is so much stuff that we haven't done yet. How is it possible that we are spending this much time with the beavers? And so by the time we finish the first act, we still haven't even met Aslan. He's been referred to a few times, but much of what I remember of the plot of Narnia features Aslan, so for him to have not even made his first appearance by the end of the first act is quite staggering to me. Then in the second act, we meet him, we have all of the plot that follows, we have an entire war sequence, we have a coronation. Spoilers for the plot, by the way. If you don't know the plot of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, then you probably shouldn't be watching this section of the review. Come back in the next part. Better still, go and see the play first, then come back to me. But like, so much happens in the second act, and it happens at such an accelerated pace that it feels inconsequential. We spend so much time getting them all to Narnia, and yet for all that time, we expand really on Edmund as a character and the Professor, and we provide a lot of atmospheric exposition, but we don't learn nearly as much as we ought to about Peter, for example. He's a character that throughout the duration of this play never really gets explored. I think Peter is particularly hard done by this adaptation of the book, because out of the 4 of them, he is the one that we learn the least about and that we get the least insight into as a character. And then when we get to Narnia, I feel like so much of the richness of this story is them experiencing this world and us seeing it through their eyes, and them getting used to it, and them falling in love with this world enough to want to fight for it and to save it from the magical oppression that it's experiencing at the hands of the White Witch. But we don't see very much of them being in the world at all. By the time that they come to agree to fight in this war and they say for Narnia, it's like, babe, you've been here for 5 minutes. Why are you so invested in this? It's almost as though we're missing a scene where Susan, the sensible one, should be saying to the others, we shouldn't be getting involved in a war. We have to get back. We have to wait for our parents to come back from the actual war that all of this is paralleling. Paralleling. A verb? Perhaps. But like, none of them disagree with the fact that they should all be participating in this large-scale, like, civil war in this fantasy land. They're all just down with that because they're like, we need to save Narnia, despite having no discernible sentimentality for it at all because we haven't seen that get established. And they don't really get to establish a relationship with Aslan either. Now, part of this is due to the characterization. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But we don't feel them building this relationship and this rapport with Aslan, so when certain things happen in the second act, we're not that saddened by it, because they are also reversed almost immediately. Like, it makes everything in the second act and some of the death and some of the tragedy feel a little bit inconsequential, because it's all just immediately undone, and none of those big moments feel perhaps as earned as they ought to if we'd really taken the time. I think just the interval falls in the wrong place. The first act in the exposition needs to be accelerated, and we need to spend a little bit more time in Narnia once they all arrive. And the first act should end with the arrival of Aslan, which should be given a lot more status than it is. The pacing throughout is also not helped by the use of music. Now, I was surprised that there was as much music in this show as there was. They begin by singing "We'll Meet Again." You know, we're in a wartime setting. That's nice and atmospheric. I don't mind that. It helps to establish everything. But there are various songs throughout the play that I just don't think we need. And I do still think it behaves as though it's a play with music rather than a musical. And yet there are some numbers that just behave as though they are musical theatre. When Santa Claus appears at the start of the second act and we have a reindeer dance number and this irritating repeated lyric about him being Santa Claus, I feel no need for that number. It's an odd enough moment when he arrives. I'm happy for them to keep it in the play, but it doesn't need an Act 2 opening number. There's a song that gets reprised throughout the second act, and I don't think we need to hear it at all until right at the end. Make like a Shakespearean play and sing this lovely folk song when the battle has been won, when the land has been reclaimed, and when we're celebrating and having a feast. Do that. I think that would be a lot more effective, and it would convey the light-hearted atmosphere at that point, rather than making everything seem a little bit jolly while we're gearing up for war. That's perhaps a little bit misplaced. Controversially, I just don't think it needs the music. And if you're going to have the music, and if you're going to have so many characters sing, to not have Samantha Womack sing as Jadis, the White Queen of Narnia, that feels like a missed opportunity. And I don't know why we're seeing actors carrying instruments on stage if it's not a musical. I don't know what that achieves, because the way in which you're telling this story, it's not like a My Neighbor Totoro where we could see the band at the back of the stage and we can also see all of the strings and the puppeteers throughout. Most of what you're seeing with the onstage magic in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is hidden. They use a dark stage like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child for that exact reason. It's not always completely obvious how they're doing things. Sometimes it is, and yet sometimes it isn't. But I think there's no reason for you to have visible instruments on stage. I don't know what that is adding to particularly. For Amelie, it worked. They incorporated it into the storytelling very well. For this, for them to suddenly be all trying to hide behind a piano like we're aware of the existence of instruments as part of the plot, that was an odd moment. And here's another issue that I had. Now, this is part direction, part set design. I felt as though the transformation from the real world into Narnia wasn't distinct enough. I wanted more of a wow moment. I wanted more of a transformation. Now, it snowed on stage and later leaves fell to represent a different season. I enjoyed all of that. I liked the lamppost being where it was and how that was introduced onto the stage. But I just felt as though we needed more of a clear difference and we needed more of a, wow, we have moved to a different world. And there's a few different ways they could have done that. So they opened this small circle on the stage with bright light behind it that made it look like a snowy landscape. And that achieved a little bit of something, but I wish they had opened the next biggest concentric circle so you had more light flooding the stage. I just wanted it to look whiter. If it's this big snowy winter landscape, I wanted it to be like oppressively white on stage rather than this very dark stage with snow falling. There were also no trees whatsoever. I felt as though Narnia needed trees. I know we're not being literal with our representations of scenery and we're using other clever, innovative techniques, but I did feel as though we needed just a couple of trees, or people playing trees, or something to represent trees, but we needed some sense of forestry, because there's lines later about the lamppost not looking like the other types of trees, and there's no other trees. I am saying a lot in this video. I didn't even know I had this many feelings about this show until I sat down and started talking about them. Here's another idea of how you could have done this, because they use puppetry and like physicality and clever storytelling from the beginning, and had they portrayed the real world in a more traditional naturalistic way and then started using all of this clever puppetry techniques and all these other things once you get into Narnia and it made it feel more fantastical, that even then would have been more distinct without having to be visually completely separate. It suggests to the audience that the way we're going to tell the story within this realm is different because this world operates by different rules. So I do want to talk about the performances, and I enjoyed everyone's characterizations for the most part in this show, but I did think that almost everyone seemed to be a little bit one note. I want to talk about Chris Jarrett, who was playing Aslan. Now, the direction had him separated from the puppet a little too often for my liking. The puppet also didn't have hind legs, which, you know, that's a choice, and the way in which they make that feasible, I'm no expert in puppetry. If that's what had to happen, fine, but we have seen more effective puppets on stage. If the My Neighbor Totoro puppets I saw recently were some of the most expressive I've ever seen on stage, the Aslan puppet is perhaps one of the least. He just moves his head and he doesn't really convey that much. We are reliant on Chris Jarrett standing in front of him to convey Aslan's albeit limited range of emotion. And that doesn't really work. It doesn't have that Avenue Q thing where even though the performer is there, you're watching the puppet. You are just watching Chris Jarrett. And for some of the most pivotal Aslan scenes in the show, the puppet is not even on stage. The puppet goes off and Chris Jarrett just portrays Aslan while standing there like a fur-wearing dude. My issue with Chris's performance, and he brings all of the status and the presence and the grandeur and the gravitas and the aggression of Aslan as this wild beast and this leader of all of the animals of Narnia. He does all of that, and I enjoy all of that. But what he lacks for me is warmth and compassion and something that separates him from Jardis, where he needs to be shown to be different and have a different characterization to her, and it's how he behaves towards the four Pevensie children that is going to make that distinct. What I don't get is a warmth that he has towards them. That's what seems to be missing. Now, I've mentioned her a lot. Let's talk about Samantha Womack as, I always say Jadis, the White Queen, but Jardis, the White Witch / self-appointed queen of Narnia. I'm not here to talk about Narnian politics. I'm sure there's a corner of YouTube where that happens, but I have no beef in this war. So if I was not out here trying to be a professional sounding theatre critic, I would say that Samantha Womack is fierce in this show, but I am in fact trying to do that thing. So instead I will say that she portrays an antagonist with formidable force, but she's really fantastic in this role. I enjoy her as Mrs. Macready in the beginning. It has this whole Wizard of Oz style. She plays a sinister character and then is this malevolent villainous character when we go into the fantasy world, similar to Wicked Witch of the West / Miss Gulch in The Wizard of Oz. But she does regal very well. She does the whole imperious thing very well. What I'm missing from her is the genuine fear of Aslan as a threat to her power, and a fear indeed of the four Pevensie children, the two daughters of Eve and the sons of Adam, as a threat to her power as foretold in a prophecy. I'd actually go as far as to say that the most interesting thing about her as a character is that she has this genuine insecurity, and the moments in the book where we get to notice her fears and her concerns about Aslan, I think are some of the most humanizing qualities. Whereas if she's just playing this victorious, confident villainess the entire time, then we don't have any other different shades to her. And she does that very well. Her stature, her facial expression, it's all a very well-crafted performance. I'm just missing that humanizing element that I think would make her a little bit more interesting and three-dimensional. She risks becoming a pantomime villain, not because she's not playing the role with utter sincerity, but because she is flanked by these comedy character henchmen who make her a little bit less serious by comparison. They turn her into a Disney villain who is just trying to be serious and is surrounded by foolish, ridiculous goons. Is my flat vibrating? Is anyone else hearing this? Should I be concerned right now? I do also want to talk about the 4 actors playing the Pevensie children. So Amar Duffus plays Peter Pevensie. He's fairly constant in his characterization because Peter is written and directed here to be this fairly one-note, bold and authoritative characterization. He doesn't get much variety to explore with his character per the script, and I think that's a bit disappointing. By which I mean I'm disappointed on his behalf and not by his performance. I think he does a great job. Delaney Hales plays Lucy Pevensie, believably very young. You know, you have to understand that she is the youngest and she still sees the world through a different lens than the rest of them, which is why she is the first to be able to glimpse Narnia the way that she does. And you get all of that, and you get the sense of wonderment. But she is lacking a little bit of joy. They describe her as a bringer of light throughout the show, and I would like more joy and glee from her when she first discovers this world. She's a little bit shell-shocked to be meeting Mr. Tumnus, and she's very obstinate when she goes back that she doesn't want to be called a liar. But I feel like for her to be playing this young girl, you'd expect a little bit more in terms of her mood swings. Whether we need a little bit more histrionics and sobbing, I'm not entirely sure, but she feels a little withdrawn and unemotional about the whole thing, which is not what you would expect from a very young child in that situation. Robin Sinclair plays Susan Pevensie. Robin, fun fact, was understudy to Audrey Brisson in Amelie, and she does a great job here. From the beginning, hers is the clearest characterization of the 4 siblings. You get exactly where she is taking this character, and she has some lovely moments throughout the play. The one who I think has the most meaty role to really work with in this is Shaka Calico, who plays Edmund Pevensie. Edmund gets the most exploration, and he is every bit as frustrating as a character as you may remember him from other adaptations of this story. It is maddening to watch the way that he goes about this plot, but the actor does it very well and finds these different moments in Edmund's arc to eventually redeem him as a character. Now, the other name that I think bears mentioning, another alumnus of Amelie the Musical, Johnson Willis. He plays various different roles throughout the show. He plays Professor Kirk, which is the first time where we get to really enjoy him in the show. The Professor gets an awful lot of mileage in this adaptation, and he's a very charming, very intriguing character who starts to instill this sense of wonderment throughout the play. He also plays Father Christmas. I have entirely mixed feelings about that number, but he characterizes it in a very distinct way that I enjoy very much. And then he plays an unspecified ancient animal creature later. He's credited as the Wise Owl and the White Mouse. I think the one I'm thinking about is the White Mouse because he had a mouse-like tail and pig-like ears. So I guess that's closer to mouse than it is owl. I enjoyed him in that role as well. I think of the ensemble of brilliant actors, he was definitely a highlight. And he has this incredible voice for an older actor. I could listen to him sing plenty of things, and I would like to. A couple more random things that are just coming to me. I do feel like the use of colour is really important, and I love the transformation of the witch's costumes over the course of the show. I think it's so important that she comes back wearing the fur of Aslan when she goes to battle. And generally, I enjoy a lot of the costuming. It's a bit odd that some of the animals are a lot more animalistic than others. You know, you have a Okay, fun fact, I can't say the name of this animal. A squirrel, I say squirrel, I apologise, but you have that animal who has an entire bushy tail and ears, and then the beavers, it's like beaver elements are suggested by more everyday items, so they look less like animals than they do like people dressed as beavers. But the fact that you have that and you have such an awareness of the importance of colour and theming, and then at the end when you have the coronation of the 4 human characters, and then the first thing they put on is white robes, white being the colour that has represented this century-long oppressive winter that all of the animals have just been freed from. I don't know why they wear white. Wear something autumnal, wear gold, wear bronze, but white feels like an odd choice in that moment. It's also a little disappointing to me that we don't get a sense of those characters aging, because then that moment that can be really impactful when they go back through the wardrobe and they turn back into their younger selves after years and years and years of living in Narnia. It doesn't feel like it's been years of them living in Narnia. It doesn't feel like they've aged and forgotten entirely about their previous life and are overwhelmed to be back and suddenly realizing what they had left behind. It feels like it's maybe been a crazy couple of weeks chatting with some beavers in a snowy realm. It just doesn't have the fantasy level impact that it ought to. And there are moments where people aren't really sure whether to applaud, and there are moments that fall a little bit flat. The victory of the battle, most of the battle sequence feels like there are about 4 people involved, and it should be this entire nation, 2 halves of it, going to war, all of the animals versus all of the creatures of darkness. And I get that that's difficult to portray on a stage versus, with a Hollywood film budget, but it does very much feel like Samantha Womack and this one wolf are trying to take on the world. Also, and this could be a point of public debate, let me know what you think about this down in the comments. Do we think the stone table ought to break? Did the stone table break? So when Aslan is resurrected in the second act after being sacrificed in order to excuse the sins of Edmund, who has been branded as a traitor, usually, my understanding of this was that the stone table breaks, and that completes the whole thing being a fairly heavy-handed metaphor for Christ and for the New Testament and for Jesus dying for our sins but then rising from the dead with the rolling away of the boulder. That's what I felt like was represented by the stone table breaking, because the whole thing is a bit of a biblical allegory for believing in God and a higher power even when those around you challenge you not to. So from where I was sitting this evening, the stone table didn't seem to break. Either I missed it or the stone table doesn't break in this version, but I feel like that's important. I wanted the stone table to break and it didn't. Does that matter? Am I being facetious? Who knows? You can let me know. Now, as I'm talking through this, I feel like I am being a little bit harsh on this production, and it's just because I had such high expectations and because I know that it is the kind of storytelling that I would expect to love. And so I do want to point out a few things that I did really enjoy. The way they staged the end of the first act, it's a weird moment to end on, but visually what they do with it is incredibly striking. The way that they create Mr. Tumnus's house is fantastic. Every time something falls from above the stage onto the stage, that gets me. That fills me with wonder and joy. The way they make you anticipate the first arrival of Aslan is brilliant and builds that tension and that excitement. Now, I think that's possibly too much for their version of Aslan to live up to within the show, but the way that they build it and anticipate it is still really great. They create some beautiful tableaus. There's one moment where they have 2 actors playing birds who are flying horizontally at either side of the stage, and you have all of these different animal characters, and you have this beautiful ensemble. It's all very vivid, it's very striking. I enjoy that very much. Weirdly, I think my favourite moment of the entire thing was nothing to do with the animals. It was a puppetry moment, but it's when Edmund is trying to find his way back to the Queen's castle, and he's being haunted by the nightmare of the Turkish delight that he was tempted with before, and that he kind of sold out his siblings and Mr. Tumnus in order to get more of. And that Turkish delight is puppeteered around and forms an anthropomorphized Turkish delight nightmare monster that walks towards him. That, for some reason, that put the biggest smile on my face, but just because I wasn't expecting it whatsoever. That's such an ingenious thing to do with that scene. I thought that was fantastic. More of that energy throughout the rest of the show, and I'd have been delighted. But this is the thing, is this creative team are not lacking whatsoever in style. The visuals are there. It's just the structuring of this plot and the pacing of this plot and the instilling of the necessary emotions. I think too often there were moments where I really ought to have felt something and they felt inconsequential and unimportant. So the theatre-going experience this evening was really fun. I love the artwork on the outside of this theatre. I love how colourful it is, for a show that you could really associate with whites and browns because that's the colour of snow and wardrobes. I love that it's a multicoloured artwork. You can see it here. look at this. They had some lovely merchandise at the merchandise booth upstairs. I obviously bought a little Aslan Lion toy. I thought those were super cute. They have, hilariously, the same photo locations from Cinderella. I don't know if this is just the new standard for the Gillian Lynne Theatre or if they chose to maintain those because the whole floral aesthetic that they were going for with Belleville towards the end of Cinderella's run also fits the kind of spring, outdoorsy nature idea that Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe has, but you have these floral areas with a lamppost and with the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe font title in front of, so you can take pictures with those. There is also a lot of red, white and blue bunting. That I understand less. I don't really know what the bunting's about. So I do think this is still a really striking production, and for a lot of people, this is also a great Christmas choice of something to see over the festive season and to take your family to. If you're the kind of person who isn't maybe interested in pantomime entertainment, if you want something a little bit more sincere, a little bit more serious, if you're a bookish type of person like myself, then you might want to go and see The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I had forgotten how much fondness I had for the film until I went to go and see this, and it reminded me of the love that I have for the film. So I think if you are a fan of this story, of these books, of anything within the fantasy genre, of A Lord of the Rings or of A Game of Thrones, then I think you'll enjoy this as well. Also, if you liked Amelie, it does have that same kind of a sensibility. If you like those kind of productions, actor-musician productions, something with like an ensemble cast, multi-rolling, that's charming and witty, but also compelling and a little bit magical, then that is very much the vibe of this production. So you should definitely get yourself a ticket to go and see this. And travel to Narnia. But those have been my thoughts about The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you have seen this production either on tour or at the Gillian Lynne Theatre, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments section down below. And remember, if you want to review it for yourself, you can click on the link in the description, sign up for an account with ShowScore and drop a review on there. And then let me know when you have. I would love to go and read them. Thank you again for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel so you don't miss any of the content that I'm going to be posting. I have more reviews coming soon, as well as a bunch of different videos on all sorts of stagey topics. If you want to see what it was like at the media night at Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, stay tuned until Sunday, where it should be appearing as part of my new weekly Oh My God Hey series, where you get to see me actually going to all of these shows and having stagey adventures. If you really enjoyed today's video, you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a tip. That really helps me to make these videos as a stagey content creator. Also, you could go to patreon.com/MickeyJoeTheatre, where you can also gain access to some exclusive photo and video content. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my God, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!